Hi, I'm Lawrence Krauss, and welcome to the Origins Podcast. I'm really excited about this podcast, which is my second podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson, an old friend and colleague, and of course, one of the most well known and recognized faces of science around the world. Neil has come out with a new book called Starry Messenger about having a cosmic perspective on human issues, and I wanted to talk to him about that. And it was a great chance for us to have the kind of give and take that I enjoy having with him so much, and I think it's important for the public to see that. People often misinterpret the fact that we don't always agree as somehow representing some problems between our relationship, but it's not that. It's just the standard give and take of scientists being willing to have that conversation and not agreeing, but going back and forth with respect and enthusiasm. And so, of course, because his book is really about how a scientific perspective is such an important part of human civilization, and that's something I've been pushing for my whole career and my whole career as a public scientist as well. We obviously agree on those fundamentals, but parsing some of the things he says allows us to elaborate on some of that and talk about our different perspectives. And sometimes, as I say, we disagree about some of the emphasis and some of the issues, but really it allows us a chance to give examples about the beauty and wonder of science in many different ways. And so the conversation was incredibly exciting for me, and I hope it will be for you. You can watch it without any advertisements on our Critical Mass site if you subscribe to Critical Mass, our Substack site. Of course, you can also watch it on YouTube, our YouTube channel, or you can listen to it on any of the standard podcast listening sites around the world. No matter how you watch it or listen to it, I certainly hope you'll enjoy it, but I hope you'll consider either subscribing to us on Critical Mass or on YouTube. But either way, I hope you'll consider supporting the foundation, which happens if you subscribe to it on Critical Mass, because the nonprofit foundation, the Origins Project Foundation, is designed to do what this particular podcast is all about, to connect science and culture around the world in many different ways, and I hope you'll consider supporting that effort. So thanks again, and once again, I hope you enjoy this podcast with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Well, Neil, thank you for coming back again to talk. I always have so much fun when we talk, and I'm looking forward to this.
Well, thanks for having me, because it's been a while. You don't call, you don't write,
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah,
several
exactly.
years.
But actually I do call and write. You just don't answer, but.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay,
anyway,
I'll check my inbox again. All right.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I'm sure just one of the many, but, one of the reasons I like our discussion so much is one of the reasons that people don't understand our discussions, because they reflect, for me, the friendly give and take that is really part of science, and which really you talk about a great deal in this lovely book, which I will show because I'm going to show it anyway, because I did really enjoy it. But people often think you and I don't like each other, whatever, because we argue, but it's that friendly argument, the fact that you can disagree or learn from each other, and I like to think we both have.
I think there's some moment when we were on stage getting to some dust up, but of course we all go out for beer afterwards, and I think that's a very important distinction between what happens between scientists and apparently everybody else today.
Yeah, but I do remember that one time on stage, and I wasn't one of the ones that was either holding you or wanting to hit you. So I was just watching. But maybe I may have felt like it, but I didn't get up and do it. Anyway, I want to do is talk. I want to talk about the new book, which I really enjoyed a lot. Even though there are issues that I have that we're going to discuss, but it raised perspectives that were interesting and caused me to think, which is of course really the point of books. And we don't have to go into your origins because we've done that before. Even though this is an origins podcast, but I do want to ask about the origin of the book in some sense. What caused you to take this tack? I know you've thought about these things and often reflect in things like your tweets and other things. You try and present what you would say is a cosmic perspective. For a long time, I think I've known that. But what caused you to write this book, basically?
Let me first blow a little smoke your way and say that the whole concept of origins is so fascinating and such a challenge. It's a scientific challenge, an intellectual challenge, an emotional challenge. How do you know how something got there when you don't have more than one example of what it is that got there? And so the fact that you're continuing to carry this torch, which has been burning in bits and pieces around funding streams, for a few decades now, but I don't hear much about it lately, except through your efforts. So, I just want to
thank you. Okay,
send that your way.
We can end the podcast now.
Oh, well, should we? Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, the origin, I would say, was when I was in middle school, where I'm ascending rapidly in my science literacy from books I'm reading and the science classes I'm enjoying. And I was an amateur astronomer. And in case people don't know, to say you're an amateur astronomer is actually a statement of ability, not of it's a statement of talent. Okay. You would never go to an amateur neurosurgeon, okay? But if an amateur astronomer moves in on the block, that's a good thing. They're going to have a backyard telescope. They're going to show you the night sky. They're going to point out the constellations. They're going to show you their magazines. It's their photos.
Yeah.
So I had this level of science literacy in early middle school, like when I was 12, 13, 14, and I'd walk around it and I'd see adults, like full-grown adults, say things and do things like, what? What? Don't you know? Don't you know? What? How come you don't? I know, but you're 3-4 times my age. And to see otherwise rational adults who were in charge of things, who were running for office, who wield resources, be, let me say, victim of their own on what would they be a victim of? They're a victim of an educational system that doesn't value science enough to guarantee that everyone coming out of school is scientifically literate. So that when in 1973, because that's how old I am, Comet Kohoutek was coming around. It was billed as the Great Christmas Comet because that's about when it was going to round the sun.
Yeah.
And it was discovered farther out than any previous comet. So when you do that, you say this is going to be a doozy. But it turned out it wasn't very loose with its gases, okay? And so the comet has to be kind of loose enough so that
loose with its gases. I love that. That's a Neil quote I'm going to use.
But in context, okay? So comets that have been jostled a bit, there's more ability for them to generate these gaseous plumes in their tails. But this one didn't. But that's not what matters here. What matters is astronomers discovered the comet even well before it was visible to the naked eye. And I saw people, adults, on the street, and I am 14 years old, one carrying a placard, repent, the comet is coming, the end of the world is near. And I said, no, it's not. I can't. No. I mean, you didn't even know about the comet till we told you. And these frustrations have accumulated my entire life, observing, casinos, New Age festivals, things where sort of adherence to scientific principles are loose if they exist at all. Yeah. And I said, I don't have time to do anything with this awareness, but I was taking notes. And so over COVID, I think I was gestating the book my whole life. And over COVID, it came to term, watching the vaccine denials and all of this. And this book was just birthed. And the funny thing is, I'm in this web universe called Goodreads, where a lot of readers talk to each other about their books. One person asked me, when you were writing this book, what did you do when you had writer's block? And I said, no. This was an entire, I know writer's block and I know how that can happen, but it didn't happen with this book.
Yeah, you'd been stuffed and just waiting to go.
Yeah, and if you remember from the book, there are examples of cases drawn from my entire life.
Yeah, and I read that
observations I've made.
Yeah, I read that in the acknowledgments And I also will say I've noted that about you from you. I knew you before you were you. Okay.
I think we go back to the 80s, don't we?
We go
Don't we
back a
go back to
long
the
way.
80s?
And I
Yeah.
remember, giving a talk, and you were, and your wife were in the back of the room, and you were observing, and I think you
Who, by
even
the way, has a
reflected.
PhD in mathematical physics. My
Yeah,
wife
yeah,
does.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Mhm. Uh-huh.
And exactly, and therefore, has abilities. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But
But no one
but
else does. But you got to
yeah,
have
yeah,
that
that's
degree to
right.
have an
Yeah,
ability. Okay.
but I remember sitting in the back of the room, and I think afterwards, I came out, I ran back to see you, and I just remember you were commenting on things that I'd said or the way I'd said it, and it was just clear to me you were, you've really reflect on have for a long time have reflected on not just things but how to present them and how to think about them, and it's sort of a cumulative effort. And so yeah, it's clear that this is the result of not just a lifetime of frustration but a lifetime of scientific experience, and it's the kind of thing I love. One of my favorite books of all is a book by Jacob Bernowski about which is his version of this, in the sense of the of the need. As he said, science is whole and real. It's not a matter of playing games. It's there whether you like it or not. And in any case,
Right.
so obviously we resonate on that. Although, as I say, I'm going to try and there's some things I learned. There's some things that you present perspectives rather than opinions. But the question is sometimes whether I want to ask you questions about your perspective. Sometimes I have, but I
Yeah.
love the
Yeah. I mean,
illusion.
thanks for noticing that. I mean, the book is, I think it doesn't soften anything that has to be said the way it needs to be said. And
Yeah.
the chapter titles go deep into everything that divides us today. So
Yeah.
race
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
color and gender and identity and law
Yeah.
and
The things you're
order
not
and
supposed to talk about.
you're
Yeah.
not supposed to talk about. And so a whole chapter that was originally called War and Peace, but it ended up being mostly about political battles,
Yeah.
And so I changed it to um what I call it. Not
Law and Order. No. Or,
no, not Law and Order. Yeah, Law and
there
Disorder.
was one near the end. Yeah, I forget what
No,
the
no, no,
name
no. It was
is. It's
early. I think it was. I called it um, conflict and resolution. Right.
Conflict and Resolution.
Which was more
Yeah.
a broader, which includes war,
Yeah.
and I do talk
Yeah.
about war, but again, it's uh, the blunt revelations that a science lens, especially a cosmically informed science lens, can bring to all of these topics. And so it's not me presenting opinions, although of course I have opinions, but I don't care that you know my opinions. You're a different person. I don't require that of other people, that they share my opinions on things. If everyone had my opinion, how boring that world would be.
Yeah. Well, we talk
But
about
everyone
that.
should at least align with the objective truths delivered by the methods and tools of science. And if you don't, then it's chaos.
Yeah, and you say it in some ways that I want to actually talk about. I want to parse some of the things you say. A lot of things you say. In fact, we won't get there. I know I have notes. I think I have about 120 questions, so we're not going to
Okay,
get through all of
got to
them.
start somewhere.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
do
but no, I
it.
mean, questions or points, not all. I will say, I think the use of the word "Starry Messenger" is beautiful. I mean, the allusion to Galileo bringing us the first inconvenient truth, which was,
Yeah,
that
that's a
the
nice way to
moon.
put it.
Yeah, yeah,
Correct. Yeah, I mean, something unappreciated by many, I think, is when he observed Jupiter and he saw these little stars near Jupiter. He called them Jupiter stars, right? What else? There's no
Yeah.
other word for them,
Yeah.
because the idea that another planet would have a moon was just a foreign concept. And so he watches Jupiter migrate across the sky, as planets do, and these little stars stayed with it. And that was kind of cool. And he kept watching him, and he was able to notice that they orbited Jupiter. And this was the first time anybody saw
That's
that
the
Earth
main
was
thing.
not the center of all cosmic motion. Something as simple as that.
Just
And
profound.
so it's profound. It's profound. And these are messages from the universe.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't Copernicus so much saying, well, here's a reason that, maybe the Earth's orbit sun. It was an observation that you couldn't get around. These things went around
Right.
Jupiter. There's no way there's no way you could get around that fact. And boy, it had to change your picture. And I think that
Right.
that is indeed the beauty of science, as we'll talk about. The fact that reality can cause you to change your mind is so important and so liberating. And I'm a little worried about it because it's also under attack, as we'll talk about. The So again, well, okay, we'll get to. I like your use of aliens too, but we'll get to that in a second.
You got to throw in an alien every now and then because they don't have any preconceived notions about us.
No, I've often thought of that. I don't want to get too far because I always tend to want to jump ahead because I like it. But I will say this: I've sat in a city at late at night, say 2 a.m, or maybe in the country, and I'm at a stoplight and it turns red, and I've often thought. And there's nobody around. Nobody. There's nobody.
It's better at night,
if an alien
too.
came here, why would they think that I would stop the damn car? It's just, I mean, so stupid. Anyway, but okay. But let's start about some of the things that are impediments to thinking this way. And you talk about a very important thing, which you actually ran a meeting in my Origins Institute for a while on, but the fact that groupthink does give some survival advantages, that there are evolutionary reasons why we're not completely rational and and they helped us survive. The teleology, which I think you talk about in the book somewhere, but the fact that,
if I did, I surely didn't use that word.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't use the word. Okay. Yeah, exactly. I know you didn't.
I'd like people understanding what I say.
Yeah, I know. I just do that so I sound superior. But anyway, but the need to always find purpose, for example, the examples of, the humans on the savannah, and I think you use it, if the leaves are rustling and you can assume there's no reason behind it or something reason, and the people who didn't assume there's no reason, they'd get to have babies and survive. So so there is this evolutionary.
I think a cleaner summation of that is that curiosity is not always rewarded in the wild.
Yeah.
Because curiosity of something that can kill you kills everybody who's most curious.
Yeah, it kills the cat, certainly.
Yes, hence the expression, curiosity killed the cat. Right. So I don't want to hold it against people if they're not curious. What I want to do is offer them the fact that they were once curious as children.
Yeah.
And so much of our curiosity was squashed by adults trying to have us not die. But in the effort to have us not die, they're preventing us from all manner of other experiments that would have been conducted and weren't. And as a result, I think I'm blaming this, that the seeds of curiosity just fade. The blooms are not, don't get fertilized, and you just and the curiosity goes away by the time we're in high school, to the point where when you graduation day, what are people saying? School's out. What's that Alice Cooper song? School's out for school's out forever. It's a celebration of not having to learn.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to blame the song for making that happen. I'm going to blame schools for that even being a thought.
Yeah.
For a rock artist to compose lyrics around.
Well, I think I know from our last discussion, I was going to mention when you said you started to think scientifically in middle school, through school and other things, but you actually did say that it was school teachers weren't a big deal in your life. I remember you said that in our last discussion, that they really didn't have that. It was internal, I think, and you didn't find school particularly. I mean, you later on went to Bronx High School of Science. I would assume that was a good school, but
well, just to be clear, what makes schools good is the other students who are there more than who's doing the teaching, right?
Absolutely. I mean, all the way through school, including university.
All the way through. You can go to a fine marquee college and you take intro physics using the same textbook as any other intro physics across the country. And so it matters more in graduate school, of course, where you have relationships with brilliant professors and things, but for the rest of that, book learning, no. And so because I didn't shine in the ways you're supposed to in school, so that a teacher will notice you and then tell everyone, oh, he'll go far. The boxes weren't checked in my case under those conditions. And so, no, And it's funny because people will start out with the question, what teacher influenced you?
Yeah.
They start out. I was
Yeah.
like, no, I'm where I am in spite of teachers, not because of them. One day I'll compile all my report cards and what teachers said about me, and I'll publish that, but not just yet. The world's not ready for
Wait
that
till they're
yet.
dead. I think you should wait till they're dead. It's fair.
Oh,
Only fair.
okay. Like Copernicus, I'll be on my
Yeah.
deathbed.
Yeah.
Here it is. And you
Yeah.
write the preface. So, he really wasn't supposed to publish this, but even if it really isn't how the system worked, we have to, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, go. Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, Steve Pinker, by the way, wrote his book on rationality gives a lot of reasons why people aren't rational, but I don't want to talk about Stephen. I want to
More
talk
than
about
I would have given. I really just touched on it, just so that people didn't feel like a complete idiot for feeling that way.
You right at the beginning. I mean, I'm starting at the beginning of the book, and hopefully we'll work the way.
Are we on question 1 now?
What was that? We're on page 2.
Are we on question 1 now out of 120? Okay.
Yeah. But you say something like nothing is more human than the methods, tools, and discoveries of science. I mean, all of that I can't help but agree with. They shape modern civilization. I have always said science is a vital part of our culture, which people don't realize. And that's really a different way of saying what you're saying. But the question I want to ask is it an invisible part? Part of the problem is it is a central part of our civilization, but is it so invisible that people don't realize it is? People don't realize what they're doing is
That's
science.
A great question. Really excellent question. I think it's not that it's invisible, which it is, but I don't think that's the main thing. It's that we are so adaptable as a species, we simply grow accustomed to it. So it's hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
The fact that your smartphone gets GPS timings that have been corrected for Einstein's relativity, so that you can find the shortest route to grandma's house, that's hidden in plain sight. You just know it gets you to grandma's house.
Yeah.
And I once tweeted, I said, this one, it was a little letter. It said, "Dear vaccine deniers, flat earthers, homeopathic special," and I went the whole list.
Yeah.
And I said, "You found each other using stupefyingly advanced technology, pivoting on discoveries in science, technology, engineering, and math. Just thought I'd let you know this." Signed, your smartphone. Okay.
Yeah, no, I once wrote back when I used to write in the New York Times, I think, or it was the LA Times at that time. Yeah, I was stuck in traffic in LA, and that's I wrote a piece. This was many years ago on GPS and general.
I hope you wrote it after you got out of the car.
Yeah, I thought of the piece. Yeah. Although in LA traffic, you could actually write the piece while you're.
Now you can recite it. Yeah. We got pretty good voice recognition today.
One of the things I like to learn was that, I've always used Feynman's statement that the easiest person to fool is yourself. And I was pleased to learn of your scholarly information here that really the first person who said that really well, at least the first person you quote, was this Arabic scholar, Ibn al-Haytham, who lived in around the year 1000
years ago. Right.
Yeah, he said he should also suspect himself as he performs his critical examination of it so that he may avoid falling into the prejudice or leniency. And then Leonardo da Vinci, the greatest deception men suffer is from their own opinion. So, I mean, Feynman basically re-quoted that, and it's really,
basically that's great. But since you're buds with Feynman, you got to give him props even when you don't.
Well,
have
I
to.
learned it from Feynman, so I guess so. I didn't learn
your
it
guy.
from. Yeah, he's my guy. He's my guy. He's my man.
He's your guy. I've never met him, and you hung out with him and played bongos with him. But so that can create a delusional sense of greatness in and of itself. With how you think about Feynman relative to any other scientist who ever lived.
Well, it's where, anyway, it's where you hear things. But the most important thing is that is probably, I would argue, that I'm going to give you a definition of science, one definition of science, because science, what people don't realize is science is a process. It's not a set of rules. And you talk about that. But let me put this to you on the basis of that. I would say science is a tool to overcome self-deception. What do you think of that? It occurred to me when I was writing.
Yeah, it took me 2 sentences to say that. You just did it in one. But I think it's in the book where I say, forget anything you've ever been formally taught about the scientific method. Here is the scientific method. Do whatever it takes to ensure that you are not fooled into thinking something is true that is not, or that something is not true that is. Period.
Yeah.
If that means getting chart recorders, getting notes, taking video, repeating the experiment, getting someone else to do it, removing your sensory system as much as possible because you're colorblind, or because you have narcolepsy or whatever.
Yeah.
Works. So yes, that is science. Nothing else is science but that.
And I think that really, in some sense, it defines science. I was at a debate I was online in debate at Oxford University, which a lot of woke students will talk about that. But the premise of the debate was everyone is religious. And unlike my atheist colleagues who were on the other side, I took the side that everyone is religious. And my argument was, if people weren't, we wouldn't need science. I mean, if people didn't naturally have this religious tendency, then we would have had to invent science. It would just be so natural to everyone that it would
I would say that another way without having to go through that portal. I would just simply say, if scientific thinking and mathematical logic were natural, it would not have the expression of the scientific method as we currently practice it today.
Yeah.
Widespread is really traceable to like the year 1600 plus or minus a few years. So why did it take 10,000 years before that even arose? Yes, there were nips and bits of it, and you can invent things. Romans built the Colosseum, right?
Yeah.
So
and the Greeks had
it's
great
not like
philosophy,
you can't still accomplish things. But the idea that the universe is knowable, that you can come up with a hypothesis that can make predictions about something you previously knew nothing about, rather than, very important distinction that I did not make in the book, and I want to make it even to a colleague who's not an astro colleague, although you might claim you are occasionally. You dabble in the
astro colleague.
You dabble in the dark arts. Okay? It is to see the rhythms of the night sky and say, on this day, the sun is going to rise over the Heelstone, as what occurs in Stonehenge. That's not really science. That's noticing patterns.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's a very important feature of what it was to come out of the caves and create the rhythms of the seasons and the crops. And you notice something when certain causes and effects take place. Okay. But to say, I'm going to do this to the crop so I get a different crop later, that's manipulating the future. That's getting control over the operations of nature. And that is what science is all about, or at least it turned out to be all about that. And so that's why it's another level up to say, I know more than just the rhythms that tomorrow is going to repeat what happened a year ago. It's another level. And that's why it took so long. Otherwise, everyone's easiest class in school would be math. So I agree with you. Science would just be a natural way of thinking, and we probably wouldn't even have a word for it. If in fact it was intuitive.
Yeah, it's not intuitive at all, and we have to learn it by example, and often have it pounded in our heads. And I think it's more than, I would say, it's more than just what you said, which is that in overcoming your self-deception, the key thing that the Greeks didn't have, which would have made, I mean, then, they were amazing in terms of things they could do, but they didn't realize that nature can overcome your self-deception. How do you do that? By experiment. And the Romans did. It's the experiment. It's the fact that ultimately you submit your views and your predictions to nature, and you don't say they're true unless you've tested it.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing.
And by the way, what shows up all the time, you get some anti-science sentiment in any particular enclave, and they'll say scientists don't really know. Scientists used to think that Earth was flat, and so they have to go back 500 years for that. And I say, that's because the idea of experiment didn't really take widespread hold. Once experiments took place, 1600, I would say, and onward, and with the near simultaneous invention of the microscope and the telescope. Oh my gosh. You want to turn stuff on its ear. So there you have it. And what then happens when you have experimental verification? not only do I get the result, but so do you, and you're a competitor of mine, and so does someone else using different wall current of a design of a different experiment. We all get the same result. That is an objective truth that will never later be shown to be false.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there because that's one of the big misconceptions about science.
Okay.
I absolutely agree. Um, it's that the fact that you will look at that you're willing. In fact, it's a great thing that quote unquote scientists once thought the Earth was flat because unlike I don't want to harp on religion, but we don't anymore, and that's proof that science works. The fact that science can change their minds because nature tells us that our pretty pictures were wrong is a virtue. It's a feature, not a bug.
Right, but I claim that's overstated because we're not going to one day change our minds. E actually equals MC cubed, right?
No, absolutely. We'll get there. In fact, I like your example of the Russian doll. We're gonna get there in a second, but I do want to take.
Are we up to question 2 yet?
We're on to question 4 of 120. Anyway, so you do say that that this system of internal self-regulation is a unique feature of probably a unique feature of science. Do you really mean that? I mean, I think it's a unique feature of scholarship. Take history, for example. I mean, the testing keeps going on and the willingness to sort of be corrected by empirical evidence. I mean, may call that the question is, do you call history science? I mean, if you're talking about this, and so often get accused of that because people are doing science when they're not doing science.
Wait. So academic scholarship broadly,
yeah,
okay, when it's done well, ought to be susceptible to fresh views on whatever people were once thinking. The difference is, it's not clear whether any other profession can declare something as an objective truth, where no one later will then show it to be false, right? So history, you can say, well, Hitler committed suicide, and everyone agrees to that, but then you find out, wait a minute, there's a note, and he had a lover, and had made the lover kill him and not himself. But that's new information. Okay, so which renders what they said previously wrong. It doesn't fit into a larger narrative. It's just wrong. Okay, that does not happen in science.
Okay, now I'm going to get to this point, which was later on. I would argue that the only objective truths are falsehoods. Namely, I do worry about this. You use the word, and I know I have a question later on, objective truth a lot. And I kind of think that's overstated. I think objective truth is, I mean, I believe that there are, I don't like to use the word I believe.
Just did.
I just did. I know, but I don't like it when I do. Anyway,
you don't believe that you like using the word believe.
No. I think
I know where you're coming from.
Objective truths.
Don't confuse.
There's no doubt that that there's an objective reality.
No, Lawrence, don't confuse absolute truth with an objective truth.
Okay.
I completely, perfectly define objective truth. That's whatever repeated experiments shows. Period.
And but here's
if you want to now I will not take the bait of the philosopher and get into an argument about word definitions.
No. Yeah, I don't want to get
that.
But let me give you an example. Let's take an example of what I mean by the fact that objective truth is that Newton's laws work, and Newton's laws will always work, and that's the point I try and make. Is that no matter what we learn about quantum gravity, you take a ball and you drop it, it's gonna Galileo and Newton were just as right, and they will be just right in the 25th century. So everything we learn about science, scientific revolutions are not like human revolutions, which actually probably don't do away with everything that went before them anyway. They like to think they do. They inevitably don't. But scientific, it's this, as you say, you call this a Russian doll, the fact that we're sort of building layers on. But at the same time,
in the sense that Newton's laws, while they fail at high speeds and high gravity, they are fully embedded within Einstein's laws of motion and gravity.
Yeah, but so the question is, our thought of what objective truth is does grow in the sense that Newton laws are right, but we know that they're not objectively true in all regimes. And so
in the regimes it's tested, it's true. Period.
Yeah, so it's tested, it continued. It's true in the sense that if you ever test Newton's laws at low speeds, you'll always get the same result. But you
That's
can't
all I'm
extrapolate
saying.
from a high speed.
Now you want to change the definition of how I use the word objective and try to turn it into absolute truth, then I can't use the word objective because we're only ever more closely approximating some ultimate truth of nature.
Yeah, well, then we may never get there.
No,
I agree. I agree.
We may never get there.
Okay. Anyway, I thought it would be worth discussing what we.
No, I'm not going to argue definitions. You want to change the definition of my word to say that I'm wrong? You can do that, and I'll use the new definition, and I'll say.
Oh, I mean, I'm a little influenced by the standard guys, but what I kind of think is that what we know is false will always be false.
By philosophers who are trying to establish the limits of science by declaring that we will never know what is actually true in nature.
Yeah, well, that's
and I claim that while that's true, it's not even interesting because what we do discover completely shapes civilization.
Yeah.
If E equals MC squared is not the absolute truth, does that really matter if we build bombs out of it and it created 60 years of geopolitics?
Yeah, so absolutely. Absolutely about absolutes. Okay. Okay.
Oh, by the way, your guy, I say your guy because I think you even debated him in some case. I've never debated anybody. So you got the cojones out there to do the debates. It's what's the guy's name? Deepak Chopra.
Oh, okay? Deepak Chopra.
I've mentioned the word truth in many of my tweets. He comes back and doesn't use objective truth. He says there are no absolute truths. And I said, I never use the word absolute. So he's trying to have the argument to put science in its place so that people can have whatever fucking thoughts they want and think it's true that are in denial of what science otherwise says is true, because then all they need to say is science hasn't gotten there yet. And when it does, it will understand astrology and you'll understand why homeopathic medicine works. You're just not there yet because science has limits.
No,
this is dangerous.
It's dangerous nonsense. And I actually, Deepak, who I've talked to, desperately wants to be respected and by scientists. And I told him it's just simple. Stop saying stupid things. And
leave really quantum mechanics out of his conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Stop. Yeah. Anyway.
That would be a big first step for him.
Yeah, it would be a huge first step. I tried to tell him that. Just stop it. Don't talk about things you don't know, understand. And that's the first step. But anyway, look, we in this regard about non-science, one of the things that you point out, and I sort of have argued it for some time because I am pretty political, is that that anti-science or non-scientific thinking undermines democracy. And let me ask you, put it another way. Is scientific literacy essential for democracy?
I don't think it's essential for everyone to be scientifically literate, but the people in power should be, or at least have advisors who they know how to trust. In a free society, you can't require everybody to be anything.
No, right? I know. I'm not requiring it. I'm just saying is some
you can't have an informed democracy and make decisions and build civilization. Just go back to the cave.
I think it's true, but do you think that explains much of the current situation then? The fact that people aren't? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. By the way, situations have been worse. So the Second World War, as I calculated for people in the conflict and resolution chapter, between 1939 and 1945, 1,000 people were killed per hour for every hour across those 6 years in the service of the Second World War. Now, if a truck barrels through a protest and kills a dozen people, it's world headlines for a few days, local headlines for a week, regional headlines for a week, local headlines for a month.
Depending on who does it, it could be headlines for a year. Yeah. Anyway.
Right. No, exactly. And so, and I think to myself, what would our heads have just exploded if we reported on every death during warfare? Vietnam, we lost 100 servicemen a week.
Yeah.
And the world lost 1,000 per hour. So, and right now, I think who was it that argued this? It was Steven Pinker, right?
Yeah.
Better
angels of our nature.
Even in spite of some of the criticisms of his reasoning that was invoked, I think there's a broader truth he's getting at that we are more peaceful than ever before.
Yeah.
Living under the control of states rather than free roaming tribes.
Yeah, and yeah, it's an interesting thing because I agree, and I happen to agree with him, and it's an issue I debated with Noam Chomsky a little bit, who I think kind of like the natural, harkens back to the kind of Descartes kind of, or not Descartes, Rousseauian view of sort of nature as the ideal, and I
By
think
the
the
way, I'm
world of
reading Rousseau
laws.
now. I'm
What
amazed
was
I'd
that?
missed that book my entire life. So it's on my mantle right
Oh,
now.
yeah. Okay, yeah. Born free, live forever in chains. It's really an interesting.
Uh-huh.
Anyway,
Good.
one of my favorite lines. But
Uh-huh.
okay, good. We'll talk about that next sometime. But one of the things you point out, which I think is really important, and people just don't understand. I'm still, by the way, only on page 5. Okay, so let me just. But because with a lot of these ideas go throughout the whole book, so I don't have to repeat them. But that people think that scientists like to agree, like you and I, we have to have a secret handshake, and we can't ever say this is, we decide evolution's true, we decide this, and we'll never listen to anything else. But you point out, if you go to a conference that's open season on ideas, and that's not only good for the field, that's it's not just good for the field, it's essential.
It's
In fact, Jonathan Rauch, the guy I interviewed, and he pointed out that science is a social activity, that it's in sense that social, the willingness, the necessity that all ideas are open to fire by anyone in the community is an essential part of science, and it couldn't be done if you didn't have that community.
and this is true with physics, but I know it's especially true in astrophysics. Our published papers do not carry your academic pedigree next to your name.
Mm-hmm.
It's just your name. And so you don't necessarily know who might be a graduate student or an undergraduate who had a summer project that plugged into the research paper. So everyone is mixed there. You look at social science journals, you get all of the pedigree, MPA, MD, and I always wondered, what's the point of that? Does that mean now I should listen to them because they're pedigreed, without regard to whether I think what they said is irrational or illogical or pointless?
Well,
Really?
one might be tempted to say that that's all in certain areas. That's all they have is pedigree. But let's not. But I won't say that, and I won't put those words in your mouth.
You
But
just did say it. You
I
just
know,
did.
I know, I know. But let me point out the dark side of some of this,
Oh,
because
wait.
I'm
Just
worried.
one thing. Just in all fairness, I think the 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 open season, as the phrase you used,
Well, you use it.
is. Okay, fine. Did I use it? Good.
Yeah,
I was complimenting you for using it.
yeah. There you go. But I'm deferring.
Okay. So I think at a conference, if it's a newbie graduate student giving a talk or a very senior person, and they say something wrong, we will still criticize them. We'll just do it a little more politely.
Okay. Okay. Maybe.
But if you're
But
in the
here's
middle, there's no politeness.
yeah,
We'll be
yeah.
a
Okay.
little polite. Just if someone is just, has
Okay,
been
but
around
how do you
50
define
years.
that? No, but I'm actually want to hit a serious point here, because I wrote a piece recently about my concern about this, about the Department of Energy, which is the major funder of physical science in the country. People
Oh,
don't
that's through
realize
the,
it. Think
through
of
the
the
particle
NSF
accelerators and things. That's why.
yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
they basically spend more money on
In
physics
other
and
words,
physical.
it's a little misleading the way you put it. It's
Uh-huh.
not like they're handing money like the NSF and the NIH to academic researchers, and that's the biggest source. They're the complete funding agencies for all of the particle accelerators in the
Well, all the
country,
national labs, but they also
all
fund
the
all
national
the
labs.
almost.
So that's what boosts it up pretty high.
Yeah,
And they
it's true, but
also,
they also fund much of physics. I was funded by the
I
DOE.
agree. I'm just saying
Yeah,
that
yeah.
to
Good
say
point.
they're the biggest funder,
Yeah.
if you
Okay.
took away the national labs, it wouldn't be as stark. That's all
Okay,
important.
good point. Okay, good. Anyway, that's not the point I'm getting at, except what worries me is that they have presented a whole bunch of new rules, which I would say are kind of woke rules, but let's not use that word. But one of the new rules is that they won't let fund meetings unless the organizers put this code of behavior, that there'll be no bullying, no harassing, no, and the question is, I worry about that because, first of all, why do we need that? We're supposed to be adults. It's not we're not kindergartners. But secondly, I worry about that because if you go up and say to someone at their lecture, "Hey, this is just wrong," you get up afterwards and say, "Look, this is just nonsense for this reason." Is that bullying? And is it only bullying if they're a young person or an older person? I mean, doesn't that really stifle it? that doesn't that really stifles. I'm really worried about it stifling scientific communication at these kind of meetings where there should be open season on ideas that are wrong. And you
I
should.
haven't read the new rule book, but
Uh-huh.
that issues forth from other federal guidelines
Yeah.
that are taking place in the workplace.
Yeah.
There's a list, a growing list, I would say, but I think the
Mhm.
rate of growth is slowing.
Mhm.
What derivative is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
The rate of change of the growth is slowing.
Yeah.
There's a rather complete list of protected characteristics of a person
Mhm.
that in a workplace you cannot denigrate, okay,
Yeah.
without risk of being reported to human resources and
Yeah.
having
Sure.
disciplinary actions taken against you. And that includes what might be a joke you would tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if a joke is a joke and has a beginning, middle, and an end,
Yeah.
if the joke references one of these protected classifications and the joke makes fun of someone at the expense of others, that can be brought up. Okay, so now in this architecture, it is very clear what they mean when they say bullying. Bullying is not simply telling someone they're wrong, even doing so aggressively. It is persistently doing it so that you're on the attack on a level that only bullies are good at. Okay. And so the bully. The bully, there's some great movies that needed bullies for their storylines.
Okay, let me take an ancient example of someone who's kind of venerated in the world, or at least I don't know that venerated is the word, but he was Wolfgang Pauli. Okay, you know what this famous story about Wolfgang Pauli? If someone was speaking nonsense, he would go up.
Oh, he says not even wrong.
Well, not even that. Worse,
he'd go
up and take the chalk out of their hands. If they were lecturing, he'd get up and take the chalk out of their hands. So he was a bully, right?
Yes, you wouldn't do that today.
Okay, the problem is
because our social mores have evolved.
Yeah, is that a good? What I'm asking you is that a good thing?
You don't call grown black men boy, all right? As they do in the song Chattanooga
Let's not
Choo Choo.
conflate things. Let's not conflate.
It's not conflating. I'm saying times shift. You can't go back 70 years and say that was good then. Why can't it be good now?
Yeah, but my question, my question to you is it a good thing? Because you're absolutely right. If you have legal definitions of things like bullying or this or that, that's one thing. But we all know in the modern world, if you after someone's lecture, or in the question period say this is wrong, this is, and they say, okay, why? You say no, don't you understand? This is the reason. Look, you've got a sign error, blah blah blah, whatever it is.
That's not bullying.
That's being instructed. Hold on, but then they report you for bullying. Then, if people are worried about being reported for bullying, because it's all perception now. People feel
it can be to the individual, but that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is not what the individual feels. It's what would a sensible person observing what happened say about what happened.
Okay, that would be nice.
Now part of the canon of this literature that's describing workplace conduct. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would point out to you that is ideal, but I will also point out to you that's not what happens, and I'm worried it won't happen. I'm worried that because of the prevalence of things like social media and other things that people's sense of victimization will take precedence over what you might call objective truth.
Okay, I don't think that's happened yet. I'm not really worried about that. But here's one, for example. I was at a conference and somebody came up and gave a whole talk on why the Big Bang didn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay. No one fought him
because we don't. It was just so silly.
We don't have the time. Or the energy for this. They got to say they gave there's a talk, that they've been hammering. He said he had some. I said, so fine. So you can be so wrong that no one is going to try to correct you.
Yeah, it's not worth talking to people like that. But that's.
And by the way, when I comment on movies, I'm kind of known for that now.
Yeah.
I will only comment on movies where they actually tried to get it right. They've earned my attention. they've got me paying attention. And I say, all right, I'm gonna watch you closely. I can
so
think
you
of
didn't
no
talk about
higher.
Interstellar then, did you? Okay.
Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
deep fundamental issue with Interstellar. I
me
haven't
too.
told
I have
Kip.
about 10 deep fundamental
Oh,
issues.
I have one. The rest, I'll let it go. But the one is, just since you brought it up,
Yeah.
whatever is the blight on the crops
Yeah,
that
that's
is.
my one too.
Wait. That's my number one. There's a blight, okay?
Yeah.
And this is the future.
Yeah.
So someone somehow declared that traveling through space through a wormhole to an exoplanet so that we can move there.
Yeah.
Somehow that's an easier solution than tasking your biologist to fix the freaking blight.
Yeah, I know.
We have recombinant DNA. We got.
It's no, but it's even worse, Neil. It's even worse. They say the blight is going to, okay, there won't be any oxygen. It took 2.5 billion years of plants and so since photosynthesis to develop the amount of oxygen we have now. You kill all the plants on Earth, there's still going to be oxygen. I mean, it was just.
Well, plus, whatever it takes to terraform the exoplanet where you're going to now move the billion people to.
Oh, yeah.
If you have the power of geoengineering to terraform an exoplanet, you have the power of geoengineering to turn Earth back into Earth.
Of course, exactly. And so I you're the expert tweeter, but I did do 2 tweets in there. But one of my favorite tweets when I saw the movie was I said, I went to Interstellar. 3 hours can be like 20 years.
Yeah, but you tell that to Kip Thorne's face.
Yeah, I know. Kip, I actually have because Kip, there's only one thing that's right about the movie, and it's, as far as I can tell, it's the only part of Kip's science that made it into the fun thing, which is the picture of a black hole and of what it would look like, and that's right. But the rest of it
plus the time dilation of the guy waiting in the ship for the folks to do their work down on the black hole planet.
But, except as we pointed out, it doesn't matter. I don't want to get into the story, but okay. So I want to get back to this. What might an alien think? People say, what would Jesus think? But what would I have that? When did you first start thinking about that? Because that is something
Forever.
that I is a mantra of mine. Like, what to step back and I say, is this reasonable what we're doing as humans? What would an alien think? And you've been thinking about that since you were a little kid?
Forever. Ever since I read the story and saw the film Slaughterhouse-Five, where Billy Pilgrim is beamed up by aliens from his backyard. I've always wanted to be beamed up by aliens and just sort of participate in their life and then come back and just sort of figure out what we look like to them.
You don't want
so
to be
that's the novel by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut's fantastic. Yeah, I also got to hear him once. He was amazing. Anyway, you make the statement, which I kind of agree with in a sense, but I want to parse it more correctly. You say scientists may be the exclusive discoverers of what is objectively true. I would agree with that if by definition you mean it's not a group of people who have a PhD or scientists, it's anyone using the scientific method.
I'm sorry, what is the wording that I used?
You said scientists may be the exclusive discoverers of what is objectively true.
Oh, sure,
I think that's overstatement.
Then I shouldn't have said that. I should have said the enterprise of science.
Yeah. Okay, because anyone,
Thank you for calling that out. I'll maybe in a later printing, I'll see if I can get that in there.
Okay, good, because I think it's important to and I think that's the whole point is
or we can redefine scientists as anybody who makes a scientific discovery.
Or uses the process of science. We're all scientists if we use the process of science. Right. I think what's more generally true here is that what you're really framing, which I think is really important, is that there is no. I would say this, and a lot of people don't agree with me, but I think you do. I think you even say it somewhere. But basically, there is no other way. There's no knowledge except empirical knowledge. Namely, revelation never leads to what you would call objective truth, and there's no way to find objective truth without empirical investigation.
I would just say that a little softer, and I'd say there is no occasion where revelation has given us an accurate description or understanding of objective reality. There's no example of that. And if there were, we'd be mining those books for it daily.
That's right. Yeah,
and of course they tried that with the Bible code. And in fact, there's an update to the Bible code with using even more advanced computers. And so these are people wanting to believe that there's insights encoded in the Hebrew of the Torah that you can pull, like almost cryptography, right?
Yeah.
And you have to just figure out what the code is, and then you bring it out, and then you can see all of these statements about the future. But it'd be pretty easy to test. You don't find things that you already know are true, especially since the original Hebrew doesn't have vowels. So how you pronounce a word gives you a little bit of latitude. But just predict a future event and lay it down on the calendar, and we'll see if it happens.
Yeah.
And if it does, more power to it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it never will. I'm just saying it never has.
Never has. In fact, I've given that challenge out when I had. I guess I didn't. I wouldn't use the word debate, but when I've appeared on stage with theologians, and I've done that a few times. You
do. I never do that. I just want to say I tip my hat. I'm just saying.
No, these are academic. I mean, once I did some big event at Yale, or academic theologians.
I know.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, but I did. I presented them. I said, give me one example in the last 500 years of a contribution of theology to knowledge. And the answer I always got was, what do you mean by knowledge? It wasn't like if I asked a biologist, they, or a
they
chemist,
give a whole litany.
Yeah. This was always, what do you mean by knowledge? And that was, anyway. But okay, let me ask you to parse another thing, which caused me to think a lot.
Well, it could be because the original tree in the Garden of Eden was the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that was the.
But you were not supposed to eat from it.
Right, which is a little weird, but I think there's been some reconciliation about that. Where,
well, no, I'm much more, I'm less an appeasement of this regard. People like the new pope because he's kinder.
I don't think I'm an appeasement. I'm just
but even the new pope said, don't ask questions. It's not a good thing. At one point, because that's the Bible says that, and I just think that's an anathema to my whole existence. Anyway, we don't have to, just like the guy who didn't think the Big Bang was there. We don't have to deal with religion. It's too easy. It's too easy to kick them when they're down. But here's a sentence you said, which I thought which caused me to think a lot. I want to ask what you mean by it. You said, to deny objective truth is to be scientifically illiterate. Agreed. And then you say, not to be ideologically principled. What do you mean by that? I think it was an interesting additional phrase, and I wanted you to expand on it.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm actually proud of that additional phrase to that.
I figured you might be, because it stands out to me.
Yeah, there are people who will say, on principle, I deny human-caused global warming.
Oh, I see.
On principle. There are people who will say, on principle, the Big Bang never happened. God would have never agreed to that. And so there are people who will stand flat-footed against objective truths, not simply because they don't want to believe it, but they have a worldview that has bits and pieces to it, and the worldview prevents it.
Yeah.
So that's really where I was going there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said they're hypocrites in a sense. Anyone who says the Earth is 6,000 years old should not get on an airplane or whatever, because all of the things we know about how an airplane works that contribute to our knowledge that the Earth ain't 6,000 years old. And so, yeah, right. I guess so that's what I thought, that you might mean that, but that's good. I like that phrase. One of the things you point out we're zooming through the book of page 10, differences of opinion enrich the diversity of a nation, sure, ought to be cherished and respected, provided everyone remains free to disagree with one another, and most importantly, again, I think this last phrase is really important, most importantly, everyone remains open to rational arguments that could change your mind. I think I want you to comment on this, because it was really Christopher Hitchens who first illuminated this for me, that the importance of free speech is not the freedom to make to speak, but by infringing upon free speech, you infringe upon the listener's right to learn that they're wrong. If you
that's
and I think that's a brilliant thing. I mean, it's really what you're getting at here. You lose the right to learn you're wrong if you censor people who might have caused you to change your mind.
Right. No, that's an important other way to look at that very same fact. And in fact, it may be even a more important feature of that fact.
Yeah, it was him who really, opened it up. But I think it's really what you're getting at, and I thought I'd just let you know that
Hmm.
Christopher had said that because I think it's really interesting. But you point out, and you say the second part of that paragraph says, hey, but the problem is, sadly, the conduct of social media has devolved in the opposite of this, which is absolutely true. Echo chambers. People want to be pundit. You find an opinion to disagree with and unleash waves of anger and outrage. So you comment on that, but as one of the original Twitterers, I want you to sort of comment. So what do you think about Twitter in that regard, as a negative, positive, or negative, in the sense that, I mean, on Twitter, and it's sort of turned out into Facebook and other things, it tends to, you've seen the same thing as me. You put something out and you get unleashed this wave of anger and hatred rather than, I mean, and the
Only
point
if
is
you
there's
express
no
an
room for
opinion.
irony or subtlety in Twitter because, but
Right, right.
yeah,
But especially if you express an opinion. So I
yeah.
learned just not to express opinions. And
But you haven't
and
learned because you've been attacked. I mean, well,
no. But the attacks, no.
you talk about your
It's
forbidden tweets, the ones you put out
forbidden.
that you
Well, no,
shouldn't
I
have.
didn't post those.
No, but you
But
point
those are
out that you have, and that's a
no. One of
mistake.
them I
So,
did.
yeah,
One of them. So the forbidden tweets are tweets that are so true and up against what people don't want to be true that it would just be upsetting. And my
hmm,
goal as an educator is not to upset people. I want you to
yeah,
want
yeah,
to learn more. And
yeah,
so I have a forbidden Twitter file, and I gave one or two examples in the book from that file. All right,
yeah,
so they don't count as having tweeted
yeah, yeah.
them.
No, but once or twice you say, "Oops," after I made a mistake and I shouldn't have, because I did upset
Yeah,
people,
yeah. The
and you can't
mistake
help it. I
is
mean, you're not going to know
the
you're going to
mistake
upset
is not
people.
having expressed an opinion. But here's an example
Hmm.
of why if they're not opinions. During or after one of the horrific school shootings,
Yes.
I tweeted that at Walmart, the nation's largest gun seller, you can buy an AR-15 rifle, yet company policy bans the sale of pop music with curse words. That's
Yeah,
all it was.
yeah,
That
yeah,
was the tweet.
yeah.
And
But
watch what happens, okay?
yeah, yeah.
The response bifurcated.
Of course.
The people who are assuming I'm trying to punditify an opinion out there, when all I did was state a fact. But what happened was there was a branch of the responses that said First Amendment, free speech,
Yeah.
But they're a private company, so they could have. Okay, fine. Then the Second Amendment people says that guns, they should be able to sell guns.
Yeah.
And these two camps each thought I was arguing some opposite opinion,
Yeah. Yeah.
what they were attacking. And I realized it must have succeeded of having no opinion at all, because everyone is putting an opinion on it that in fact is not there to begin with. So it's their own lens through which they're
Yeah,
viewing.
but and that may be one of the differences of many differences of you and me, and maybe one of the reasons you're so much more popular, but I mean, much more loved, is that you don't, you try not to upset people. And
Not
I
on
guess I'm not
purpose,
as
right?
worried. I'm not as worried about upsetting people, and that's been a fact of my life. But one of the reasons is I think one can't help. You may not intentionally do, but one cannot. You cannot stating a fact will inevitably upset some people, and I think that's just, you have to acknowledge
Oh,
that
but
and realize
okay,
that it's a
but let
reality.
me push back on you here.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, that's the whole point.
Okay. You, in part of your life, I would say a big part of your life, you're an educator. If by presenting information in a particular way, it upsets people and then they no longer want to listen to you, you have failed
Yeah, of
in
course.
that moment to continue to enlighten an audience. And so, because effectiveness is not just, are you right?
Yeah,
And do they get it or not?
yeah. No, I agree.
It's a convolution of being right and having some act of persuasion that works. Because what my father always said was, it's not good enough to be right. You also have to be effective.
Yeah,
So
sure.
to say it's their problem if they can't handle the truth,
No, that's, I
no,
would
it's
not.
your problem as an educator
Of course.
to figure that out.
Exactly. And you have to, and And I tell educators that the biggest mistake you make is assuming people are, first of all, are interested in what you have to say. And you're, just telling people that they're wrong is, and I used to argue with Richard this way, Richard Dawkins.
Don't be the teacher who says these students just don't want to learn.
Yeah, because
okay, that
you say
teacher
that in the book.
should, yeah, exactly. They should be thinking, maybe I suck at my job.
Yeah, exactly. You say exactly those words in the book. And I agree with you, except I don't think of it as so much to make people angry. I think it's to provoke. And sometimes it's, you make the presumption that if people are angry, they're not going to listen to you. The question is, if you provoke someone, sometimes that's the way to get them to think about their own, if you get them emotionally involved, then they sometimes, if you follow it up correctly.
When they're angry, they dig their heels in, and
anger, but
and you don't give them a back door to exit. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. You want to go to where people are and try and use where they're from to try and help them learn, and there's no doubt about that. But we have to realize that at the same time, I think it's naive to argue that to expect that you will not provoke. Well, like your tweet. I mean,
no, you are naive to say it's naive to say that.
Yeah,
you're naive because you are doing less thinking about it than you could.
Yeah,
is my claim. You've stopped at a point and say, look, this is the best I can do. No, you're not even saying that. You're saying this is what it is, and it upsets them, and that's what it is.
Well, let me give you an example. When you talked about in that chapter about I think it was forbidden tweets in that regard, and maybe the example used of Walmart is in there. It reminded me of a time when I tweeted maybe, which I thought afterwards might be a forbidden tweet. So the first time I was called a snowflake or woke. I never heard those terms before, and now, of course, people say I'm the opposite. But I argued a fact, which I think is still an important fact. People were so hung up on terrorism and the fear, which I think people use. I think politicians use fear as a way to control people. And I point out, I think it is true that statistically, as an American living in America, you are more likely to be killed by a refrigerator falling on you than by a terrorist. And you just look at the numbers, and it's true. More people are, and including 9/11 integrated over a 10-year period. And boy, did that provoke probably the most angry response I've ever gotten, because people were, but I still think it's important to be able to say that.
So in the chapter Risk and Reward, which we are nowhere near in your sequence of questions.
Yeah, we're getting there. I'm going to zim through.
I addressed that point. Yeah. That people have emotional reactions to some risks that are not rational.
Yeah.
But but in terms of a person's happiness or a person's perception of safety and stability, perception has to show up in that equation, because that's what we are as human beings, right?
Yeah,
and so you can make a physics enclave where you bring in, and I give this example in the book, you bring in the mountain lions to attack the deer so that cars don't keep slamming into deer.
Yeah.
And you reduce auto deaths, you reduce insurance bills and everything.
Yeah.
But the cougar runs away with every now and then with your kid who's playing in the backyard.
Yeah.
So it'll eat 30 children a year, but that's a small price to pay to save the hundreds of adults who are otherwise died or maimed.
Yeah.
This is an unutterable sentence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was unutterable. Yeah.
Okay. You can't, even though that's true.
Yeah.
You cannot utter that sentence.
But you did utter it.
But no, you do, but then no one will listen to you again ever for anything you'd ever say. It has consequences. So
did you? Oh, I thought you said you had uttered it. I thought you said you had actually.
No, I said other similar things.
Yeah,
but after 9/11, in October after 9/11, I said in the 30 days that is October 11th, I think.
Yeah, you talk about the number.
The 30 days that have elapsed, we've lost as many people on the roads.
Yeah.
As we lost on that day.
Yeah.
And by the way, we lose this many people every month.
Yeah.
And
people
so I ranked the risks.
Yeah.
And that was early on. Nobody was woke yet. The word hadn't been invented yet, and so or used in an aggressive way. So by the way, I've monitored the public's reaction to tweets that have fundamentally the same content. And you get to see the ground shifting beneath our feet. And I used to complain about that. And I said, no, this is something to navigate, not to try to resist, because you're going to fail trying to resist it. It's the direction society is moving. Get over
We'll
it.
get to that because there's one thing I want before we end at some point. There's one,
At some point.
there's one thing I really disagree with in the book, and I think it's something. Anyway, we'll get there. I want to do that I don't know whether that's the culmination, but it's a really important point you make, and I think we have to recognize the fundamental irrationality of humans, and we can't assume that the world will ever be completely rational. And if we do that, if we assume that, I think we miss them. Okay, but
no, I agree
hold that
entirely.
thought then. If you agree with me now, wait and see if you agree with me in a few minutes.
Unrealistic.
By the way, I just wanted to make sure when we go there that we had about 90 minutes, and is that a hard cutoff for you? So, I want to make sure. Originally, your assistant said something like, 90 minutes.
I got stuff going on. I gotta make 90 minutes pretty tight.
Yeah, okay. I want to know because I want to get there. Okay, no worries, no problem with the hard cutoff. But I mean, because we could go on a long time, and
it's the longest podcast I would have done in the last 2 years. Just so
great. I'm honored, and I appreciate that. I just think it's so much fun that it goes by like that. A few years ago we did over 2 hour in your office
okay.
Anyway, you thought it was just much less because it's so much fun. Okay. In your chapter on exploration discovery, which I know which is really basis of your love of space exploration in a way that I don't always share, but you do make a point that when you talk about the caveman, you say perspective lurks beyond the cave door. Let me turn that around and say the way I would frame that is to say you got to keep.
By the way, I'm woke enough. I'm pretty sure I didn't use the word caveman. I might have said cave dweller.
I know. I was wondering when I said it. I wondered whether.
I'm more woke than that.
Yeah. Because I'm understand. I just learned. I didn't realize you were surrounded by your daughter. Is your sister? I don't know. I'm amazed.
No, my kids. Yeah,
but you also said someone else as an HR person, as a DEI.
Oh yeah. I have my sister-in-law, former sister-in-law.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm amazed.
Is a DEI specialist. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay. I don't want to even use those. But okay. But so beyond the cave door, I would, that, and I think to some extent you were trying to argue ultimately why we need to explore space with people and all that. And I don't want to have that argument because we've had it before. But I would turn it saying, it really means keep looking and keep testing and never trust theorists. Namely, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think that's what you're really saying in the sense that the perspective requires you to keep looking. If you stop looking, you're going to come up with nonsense. Do you agree? Is that a fair way of really?
No, I say if you stop looking, you ossify wherever you were, and we know there's more to learn out there, and when it's controlled by wise people, every prior example of that has improved civilization, the health, the wealth, the security of more people than ever before.
At one point you trying to jump ahead a fair amount, not a lot, but we're getting. I think the rate I'm going, which is going to be exponential, which I'm going to get to in a second. We'll get to the end in time because we're going to go through this book exponentially fast at the end.
There's a whole section of a chapter on exponentials.
Right? I know that's my next few questions. Okay. You do point out that one of the reasons that when you talk about exploration and discovery, with systems in place to disseminate thoughts such as scientific conferences, peer reviews, etc., there's no reinventing the wheel, no wasted effort. And I want to point out, I think that's another real misconception about science. Partly comes from the movies, partly I don't know where else it comes from, but not realizing that science is cumulative. Namely, it generally proceeds by baby steps. People have this vision of science, everyone being an Einstein sitting alone in the room at night and suddenly grand leaps. That's not the way science generally proceeds. And I think I wanted to have that little discussion so we could
I agree.
illuminate that point.
Entirely. I mean, was it Isaac Asimov who said, most scientific discoveries do not occur by someone saying eureka.
Yeah.
It occurs by someone saying, that's funny. or that's or that's odd.
Yeah.
Just some little thing. Make a note of that.
Yeah.
And
just
and
little
whole
things.
branches of research unfold from it. So
Yeah, but science doesn't always just proceed by whole new branches coming out. It proceeds by a cumulative bit of knowledge. I mean, I know what I used to love when I would do when I was working research, and I'd go into a new area, which I used to like to do a lot, usually with my friend Frank Pilchek when we were thinking about experiments and I was a theorist. But what amazed me is whenever gee, have people thought about this? Is there any data? And you'd always find, like, you go to the journals and there's massive, whatever question you had, people have worked on it. And it's such a gratifying aspect of science. And again, it flies in the face of people's imagination that everything is, I hate the word quantum leap because the quantum leap is pretty small.
Would be little, right.
Yeah, but everything is a great
leap.
It's a great leap. And science doesn't always proceed by great leaps. It often
and I would say further that science isn't always undoing a previously held idea.
Yeah, sure.
Most science is an incremental new idea that didn't undo anything.
It didn't. It just
like the DNA molecule didn't undo. We just had no freaking idea what was encoding our identity.
Yeah, people expected there was something, but they didn't know what it was.
They didn't know what it was. We discovered DNA. We didn't have to discard something else.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it led, as usually is the case with a good discovery, it not only doesn't lead to discarding, it leads to a whole bunch of new questions that you wouldn't have even asked if you hadn't made the
question. Know to ask, correct?
Yeah, and wouldn't have known to ask those questions, no, you led me to think of something, but I now forgot it. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I was just going to say, Newton's famous quote, which of course was not what he intended, which is, "I've only gotten where I've gotten by standing on the shoulders of giants." Everyone thinks it was so magnanimous of him, but of course he said it because one of his competitors was a dwarf, and he was an awful man and made fun of him. But it is true. If Maxwell hadn't been there, Einstein could have been the smartest person in the world, but he never would have come up with relativity if Maxwell hadn't developed electromagnetism first. And it's just
right. Really I think the bigger truth there is, unlike Van Gogh's Starry Night, where no one ever preceding Van Gogh or following him would have ever drawn the
picture that's right behind you, as you forget that that's your background.
the Einstein's special relativity, in particular, it was on the docket. It was on. Yeah. It was at the gates.
Yeah,
and it might have taken 3 or 5 people instead of one person.
Yeah,
it might have taken an extra 10 years, but it would have happened.
Oh, sure.
And general relativity maybe a little longer. That's more of a singular leap.
Well, David Hilbert was grasping at the door, and Einstein was really concerned that Hilbert would get it. Anyway, yeah, you're right. Well, I mean, the point is that generally, these people push us further and faster than we would have before. It happens very rarely, but there are people who push us further and faster than we ever before. But the main great thing about science is if they hadn't been there, we would have gotten there eventually anyway. Generally,
correct.
Yeah, and now in your exponential chapter, which I think is really or your discussion of exponentials, which is kind of neat, is everyone does think the present is the most exciting time. I suspect that's partly evolutionarily, because if you didn't feel that way, you wouldn't want to wake up in the morning in some sense. I mean, you have to kind of feel like the present is the most exciting time, but it is this flaw.
No, I would say most of the history of civilization, nobody is thinking that way. I think that's a very American thing, actually. Really? Because it's anyone who participated in the Industrial Revolution could fully expect to be living differently tomorrow than they did yesterday. That was not true for most of the history of our civilization. So I'm not going to say we evolutionarily need to think that today is a brand new day.
Yeah.
I don't. You just want to survive. And
if all you're trying to do is survive, then that, I mean, that's, you need to be.
You don't have the luxury of those thoughts.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's one of the luxuries, and why science was done early on by people who had the luxury. They didn't have to survive. They were rich, or and that's the way it was.
Independently rich, yeah.
Yeah. And then, that's the way it worked early on. But this notion that the future is always more exciting is, in some sense, is true. If there's exponential growth of knowledge, the future will be more exciting. But let me ask you the question: do you think the future in our century, do you think that's going to continue to be true?
I'm not given any reason to doubt it.
Okay.
Given what the evidence has been over the last 150 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And I arbitrarily started the clock from 1870. I probably could have started from 1840, but 1870 was nice and clean because just on the doorstep of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it divided cleanly in 30-year increments up to 2020.
Yeah.
Because in 2020, people are saying, gee, let's predict what the world is going to be like in 2050. No, you can't. That is
well, but that didn't stop you from making predictions too, which I think are manifestly wrong.
I just did because I couldn't. It was low hanging fruit. It was dangling there, and I said I got to make a fool of myself by making predictions. So I did.
And one of the happy things about you, as you don't define, unlike some colleagues we know, you don't define yourself. When anyone calls himself a futurist, I tell people when someone calls himself futurist, that's when you stop listening because they miss everything. That's what discovery is all about.
They miss.
One of my favorite John Prine songs. I don't know if you know John Prine is, but one of my favorite singers. But he said, "We're living in the future." You know, how do I know? Because we're driving in flying automobiles and all the things that the 1950s thought the 1980s would have. None of it, but they didn't think of the internet, and so there's a danger of making predictions. But I want to point out a prediction. I have to say that I think I disagree.
By the way, I got to put it out there. This year we're doing this podcast, 2022, is the birth year of George Jetson.
George Jetson. Okay, I didn't know that. Excellent.
Born in 2022.
I love.
And it's also the year that Soylent Green took place.
Ah.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're old enough. I saw Soylent Green when it first came out, but I think you're a little younger than
How much older are you then? No, you're like a year older than I am.
Huh? Is that I'm only a year older?
No, you're born, what, 55, 1955?
54.
54, okay. So you're 4 years older. I'm born in 1958.
That's why, and so therefore wiser.
Okay.
Anyway,
keep telling yourself that.
One of your predictions, which I just thought was manifestly wrong, I have to say.
Oh, I love it. Tell me.
Is the neuroscience one that we will.
Oh, why do you think that's wrong?
I just wrote in my new book about consciousness, and I'm so clear to me that you said neuroscience and understanding of the human mind will become so advanced that by 2050, that mental illness will be cured. Oh, come on. I hope we're both around in 2050, and when you're wrong, you will owe me a very expensive bottle of wine.
No, because in the book I say I will put these out here so that everyone can show me how wrong I am. I didn't say that thinking I'd be right. It's wishful thinking.
Yeah, that is definitely wishful thinking.
Predictive thinking. Why are you in such denial of it?
Because when I wrote the new book on which you have written a lovely blurb for and helped me and wrote a lot of interesting comments that helped me, I would say, it's coming out next year. I spent a lot of time on consciousness.
That's the recent manuscript that I reviewed. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the last part was on consciousness, and that really convinced me of the challenge. The challenge is to understanding the brain. I used to think they were great, and writing that book really convinced me they were so daunting that I think it's really optimistic to think in 20 years that we're really going to make that much progress.
That reminds me of the quote from Claudius Ptolemy, AD 150, as he watches the planets move against the background stars, go into retrograde and then back again. And he says, when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. He was invoking God of the gaps. He had no fucking idea what he was looking at. So Zeus is doing this, all right? And there it was until Kepler and Galileo and Newton figure it out.
Yeah.
No, that was way more than 30 years later, of course.
Yeah, exactly. I think, look, I don't deny. What I really hate is when people say, we'll never know this, because I think that's hubris, because how do you know you'll never know unless you know?
I'm not one of those people, but you're kind of saying...
No, I know you're not. No, I know.
You're kind of saying that about the brain, though.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying 20 years. I expect we'll learn. I expect it eventually. I just think I have more respect for the complexity of that whole issue, that I think I'll be amazed if maybe there'll be an Einstein of the brain come up, but it
just takes a breakthrough. Yeah, this is a point that Ray Kurzweil makes when they were at the beginning of the Human Genome Project. Okay, after a couple of years, they made a 10% advance on it, and people saying, "Oh, it'll be another 100 years before we get the genome." He said, "No, this will be 10 years." because we were still in the Moore's law growth of
Yeah.
computing, and it's computing intensive activity. And sure enough, 10 years later, the human genome was mapped.
Yeah.
Because everyone at the time was thinking linearly, as you are now about the brain.
No. I don't think well, I think, yeah. Anyway, I think it's just, it's really complex, but I don't think the half-life, the exponential doubling time is in that terms of, if I look at how much we know about consciousness now versus 20 years ago, I don't think the exponential doubling time is less than 20 years. I think it's more like 50, but hey, we'll see. Anyway, who knows? That's the great thing about science, is we don't know. We'll find out. If you knew, then it wouldn't be discovery.
I want to see neuroscience supplant psychology in the way chemistry supplanted alchemy.
I'm with you there. Absolutely. By the way, one of the things that I learned, but then I realized I disagree with, but it was, a little bit, was really neat, was this Earthrise, which you point out, a really important thing. There is no Earthrise on the moon.
Right.
But it isn't. But then I realized, I thought about it. It's not really fair, because the Earthrise you point out, was taken from the command module, and if you're orbiting the moon, there is an Earthrise.
Right. My only point was, when people saw the word Earthrise and the Earth on the lunar horizon, they assumed Earth does on the moon what the moon does here.
No, that was right. I'd never thought about it, and it was really neat for me to think of it. But then I at least realized it was fair for them to say it was an Earthrise, because they were seeing it every.
It was fair, but educationally misleading.
Minutes.
And I think about how people receive information.
I know,
otherwise you're not really,
and it caused me to think. It caused me to think. It caused me to think.
You're lecturing to people if you're not thinking about how they're receiving information.
Absolutely, you're right. And anyway, it caused me to think that, hey, you're right, there is no Earthrise. I never thought about it. And a neat thing. Now I'm going to jump ahead 150 pages because you've got the, you have the wrong set of priorities, and you have to leave me. But anyway, so here, you have agreed with me that people aren't rational, and there's nothing you can do about it. And
no. Hold
on. No. Let's get to this, because
I didn't say there's nothing to do about it. I'm saying the irrationality of human being is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I agree with you there. I want us to use that feature. And so you talk about this, and it really grated on me, this Starmus experience. And I've had the same experience at Googleplex, where you have these incredibly naive group of scientists who have no experience in the real world, never been politicians, never had to do policy, suddenly think, I remember this, Google will put together these weekend meetings, and at the end of it, I think people think they're solving the problems of the world and in a weekend, and if they could be solved in a weekend, they wouldn't have been solved. So you have this great tweet, which I love. Well, sort of love. Earth needs a virtual country, rationalia, with a one-line constitution. All policies should be based on the weight of evidence. I think all you're saying is that country is science, but that country can never be politics. And you try and talk about politics can never be based. Let me make the argument that politics can never be based on the weight of the evidence, because it has to be, because the whole art of politics is making decisions in advance of the evidence. My wife used to work for the government of Australia, and she reminded me scientists would come in and think that the scientific issues were really relevant to politicians. But the politicians have a lot of other factors they have to deal with, including the known irrationality of humans. And so, for example, the one example you use is capital punishment. Yeah, we should have a policy about capital punishment that's based on seeing if it deters crime. But we can't base it until we have a policy that there's capital punishment. So you have to have that policy, or decide if you're going to have that policy, in advance of knowing anything. And I think a lot of the time that's what politics is based on. So your ideal country is impossible, because politics can never be based on the weight of evidence. What should happen is, if the evidence shows you're wrong, you should be able to change your policies. I agree with that. But you always have to make policies if you're a politician, I think.
What is your brain invertedly wired in this moment? I don't get what you're saying.
I'm saying you make a big point of saying that politics should always be based on the weight of evidence.
Invoke capital punishment. Okay. So now you can do research and talk to criminals, talk to people who are already incarcerated. You can talk to you do your best you can. Psychology would be elevated to the most important science of a government under these irrationalia, because human behavior is everything. Okay, you know what the politics is? The politics is not arguing whether this human-caused global climate change. The politics is, do we tax solar panels from China versus do we have carbon credits? But then you debate that and you say, what is the evidence for carbon credits to achieve what we want? What insights do we have on this? And then you talk about other things, other credits, because maybe you don't have exactly carbon credits, but you have some other example.
But I would, you're right, and I'm with you in spirit completely. But I would argue that in the real world, you have to say ultimately we have to decide on whether we're going to have carbon credits or not, and we don't know what the answer is going to be. And if we're really going to behave like, let me just finish 1 second. You're by the way the only person who can really talk over me as much as I talk over other people. But
because we've had pollution credits, right?
Yeah, no, hold on. But you can say, I think what you can say is we don't know for certain whether they're going to have that effect. What would be great in the rationalia, in the country rationalia, is if we then put in carbon credits, and 5 years later we discovered that there were all these unexpected side benefits and side effects that suggested maybe it wasn't the best thing, and we should have another policy. If politicians were willing to say, you know what, our experiment failed, let's try a new thing, and that never happens. But I think inevitably in the real world you have to. Yeah, but I think in the real world, you always have to make policies in advance of knowing you have some evidence and you have some basis for your presumption, but you never
and then you base the law, but right, and in proportion to that evidence, correct.
Okay, well, we're completely agreed. We're both rational, and by
the way, the irrational elements of being human, I think, is responsible for the greatest works of art there ever were. No one is analyzing art saying how rational is it.
Oh yeah, exactly. Nor are they saying how useful is it. They always say about science how useful is general relativity, which it is useful, but they never ask that about a Picasso painting or your favorite painting behind you, Van Gogh. They never ask that for a Mozart symphony. But science is like a Mozart symphony at its best, is like a Van Gogh painting. It is part of our culture, which is what you said at the very beginning of the book. And which is one of the reasons why science and starry messengers can be important for our thinking about ourselves, because I care about you, Neil, and I know that you need to go. And I think that's a good way to summarize that. I didn't really matter what part of the book we discussed, because I knew the discussions would be about the importance of science, and I really enjoyed it.
You're a deep enough thinker on most topics that any place, you just close your eyes and drop your finger, throw a dart into the book, it's going to hit a place that makes a good conversation. So
yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really did. Thanks a lot.
All right, well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it too.
Dude. So if I'm on Joe Rogan, I'll say I had a longer interview with Lawrence Krauss. That's what I'll tell him.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
then he might try to top that. I don't know.
Yeah, of course he will. Of course, that's okay. Okay, you take care, young man, because you're younger than me, and all right, and be well. And I hope to see you in person sometime. You take care.
All right, you got it. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. This podcast is produced by the Origins Project Foundation, a non-profit organization whose goal is to enrich your perspective of your place in the cosmos by providing access to the people who are driving the future of society in the 21st century and to the ideas that are changing our understanding of ourselves and our world. To learn more, please visit originsprojectfoundation.org.